WFYI podcast brought to you by Bloomington, Indiana, an American college town offering food and drink, college sports, outdoor activities, live music, cool art, and good times daily. Everyone is welcome in Bloomington. More information at visitbloomington.com.
This is WFYI News Now. It's May 7th, and I'm Drew Daudelin. On today's show, results are coming in for the 2024 primary election. We'll hear about the race to become Indiana's Republican nominee for governor, how U.S. House and U.S. Senate races shook out, whether voters approved property tax increases to support school districts, and I'll chat with editor Jill Sheridan to catch up on a few more interesting races and results from around the city.
Well, I think the race for District 5, a U.S. House of Representatives seat, has definitely been one of the most competitive in the state. We had 9 Republican candidates who were on the ballot for the 5th today.
Those stories coming up, but first, U.S. Senator Mike Braun easily won the crowded Republican primary for governor. The Associated Press called the race for Braun just as the final polls closed in the state. That's even as Braun's opponents were a formidable group, some of whom spent millions in a race that went negative over the last several weeks. Braun says some of his opponents already reached out to congratulate him.
You have thick skin to get through it, and then you have to be very forgiving and don't hold any grudges if you're going to actually get something done.
Part of Braun's message is informed by his service in the U.S. Senate, where he railed against government spending.
And I think it's going to be up to the states to show how we get this country back to where the founders intended to be. Freedom and opportunity, the two most important things.
Braun will face off in November against Democrat Jennifer McCormick and Libertarian Donald Rainwater. And Valerie McCray won the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate, making history in the process. McCray is the first black woman to be a nominee for the U.S. Senate in Indiana history. The clinical psychologist calls her campaign the little engine that could, one that secured the primary victory on a shoestring budget.
My team was worth $1 million. It didn't matter how much we had in our account. Our team was just awesome.
As McCray looks ahead to the November election, she says it won't be hard to draw a distinction between herself and Republican Congressman Jim Banks.
I think that people will gravitate to the fact that I'm a different type of a candidate. I'm not your typical candidate. I'm not a career politician, and people want something different.
McCray will face off against Banks and Libertarian Andrew Horning this fall. Voters in Pike Township approved a $14.5 million annual levy to support their school district in the Tuesday primary. From WFYI's Education Desk, Eric Weddle reports most of the funds will pay educators.
Like most Indiana school districts, Pike Township used federal pandemic stimulus funds to help students. The money went toward bulking up instruction for students impacted by COVID-19 disruptions. But those funds are ending. Now the voter-approved tax increase will maintain those academic supports, such as paying for additional staff who work alongside classroom teachers to help students grasp vital skills. Some Marion County charter schools will also receive a share of the funds as required by a 2023 law. The tax increase will last for 8 years. I'm Eric Weddle.
There's a lot more to this story on property tax referenda. To find all the work our education desk has been doing, go to wfyi.org/news. And to help wrap up primary election day and fill in some of the gaps we haven't gotten to, I talked to Jill Sheridan, our policy desk editor, to find out what else we should know. Hey Jill, it's 9 p.m. right now on election night. Results are still coming in, but we've got the Associated Press calling winners for a number of races already. We've heard about some of the most high-profile races in the podcast so far, but to end the episode out, can you tell me just what else stood out in central Indiana today?
Well, I think the race for District 5, a U.S. House of Representatives seat, has definitely been one of the most competitive in the state. We had 9 Republican candidates who were on the ballot for the 5th today, and that district covers parts of Hamilton, Delaware, and Madison counties. So a few hours after the polls closed, Ukrainian-born Victoria Spartz, the incumbent, was announced the victor. So Spartz was first elected to the 5th District in 2020, but she announced her resignation last year, saying that she was going to spend more time with her family, and that is when everyone jumped into the race. Chuck Goodrich was probably Spartz's loudest competitor. The two spent very heavily on ads attacking one another in the past few months. Chuck Goodrich has served as a state representative since 2018. So now heading into the November election, Spartz will face Democrat challenger Deborah Pickett, who has a military background and beat out Ryan Fenninger tonight.
All right, and then the Republican ballot in District 6 was competitive too, right?
Yes, U.S. House District 6 was another open seat in the U.S. House, and that was left empty when Representative Greg Pence announced that he would not seek re-election. So it was a very busy race with 7 Republicans campaigning for the spot in the district that covers parts of Marion, Shelby, and Hancock counties after redistricting. Jefferson Shreve ultimately takes the night. Shreve was again a big campaign spender. If you remember, he ran for Indianapolis mayor last year and lost to Joe Hogsett. But in that race, he spent $14.4 million from his own account. He had sold a storage company of his for $590 million in 2022, and he also had served on the Indianapolis City County Council. So Shreve beat out competitor Mike Speedy, who served in the Indiana House of Representatives, and also Jamison Carrier, who's an entrepreneur. And now Shreve will face Democrat Cynthia Worth, an educator who has a background in biology, and she ran unopposed.
Okay, and then how about here locally in Indianapolis in U.S. House District 7?
Not too many surprises there. Democrat Andre Carson did see a few challengers, but easily won the night and will again represent District 7 as the Democratic challenger. That covers Indianapolis and Marion County. Carson has held that seat since 2008. The votes are still being determined for Carson's Republican challenger.
The Indiana State House, there are, a lot of State House races, but what results have we seen for local districts?
Well, there were a few competitive races for seats in and around central Indiana. State Senate seat 35 saw a contest for State Senator Michael Young, who has served in that seat since 2000. So is newcomer Philip Clay, a real estate investment banker and founder of professional development organization for young black men. He trailed behind Young as of this hour here on election night. Also, Indiana House District 95 on the far east side sees incumbent John Bartlett with a challenger in Autumn Carter, but also Bartlett leading the night. And then in House District 97 in Marion County, incumbent Democrat Justin Moed, he easily wins his re-election to that seat here in Marion County.
Just to pull out a bit to talk about sort of this entire primary election, I mean, Republican candidates for governor, there's been a lot of coverage that they spent, a record-breaking $35 million, which made it the most expensive primary in the state's history. But the state usually has low voter turnout for primary elections. Do we know what those numbers looked like this year?
Is that money worth it?
Yes.
More than 85,000 people did vote here in Marion County, and that is out of 635,000 registered voters. So that adds up to about 13.5% of voters who showed up at the polls on Election Day, and that would be slightly higher than last year's primary race. And 2020 was definitely the year that we saw the most people come out for the primaries, and that with more than 22% of people voting in Marion County during those primaries. And then nearly 12,000 people, though, voted early this year. And those numbers, as you will remember, have trended up a bit since the pandemic. We've seen that trend continue here in Indiana.
All right. Well, like I said, I mean, it's 9 o'clock tonight on election night. There are still, as we've talked, races being called. So there are still, results coming in. But thanks for catching me up, Jill. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Abriana Herron, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Drew Daudelin. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. If you liked today's episode, remember to subscribe and share. And follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.